She stood at the window of Windsor Castle, watching the rain streak down ancient glass. Queen Elizabeth II, the most powerful woman in Britain, had just received news that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Princess Diana was dead, and there were words, critical, life-saving words. The Queen had never spoken to her. Now you will hear the part of the story no one ever truly. The relationship between Elizabeth and Diana was never what the world imagined. Behind the carefully staged photographs and forced smiles lay something far more complex. Two women trapped between duty and compassion, protocol and humanity. One wore a crown that had crushed her own desires for decades. The other wore a tiara that was slowly suffocating her spirit. When Diana first entered the royal family in 1981, Elizabeth saw something unsettling in the young bride's eyes. The eagerness, the hope, the complete unpreparedness for what the institution would demand. Diana reminded Elizabeth of someone, perhaps herself, 50 years earlier, before the crown had taught her to silence every natural impulse, every human reaction, every moment of weakness. But where Elizabeth had learned to suppress her emotions and submit to duty without question, Diana refused to disappear behind the palace walls. She insisted on being seen, on being human, on showing vulnerability in an institution that treated vulnerability as the greatest threat to its survival. The Queen noticed the warning signs early: Diana's dramatic weight loss during the engagement, the trembling hands at formal state dinners, the way Charles would deliberately leave rooms when his wife entered them, the forced smiles that never reached Diana's eyes during public appearances. Elizabeth had survived her own marital challenges, weathering decades of rumors and emotional distance through sheer determination and rigid compartmentalization of her feelings. She believed Diana could do the same. She believed anyone could learn to carry the burden if they simply tried hard enough. She was catastrophically wrong. Imagine the impossible pressure pressing down on Elizabeth's shoulders during those deteriorating years. As monarch, she embodied an institution that valued stability and continuity above all else. Personal feelings were not just irrelevant, they were dangerous. Marriage was a contract, a duty, a strategic alliance, not a romance. Divorce was unthinkable. It had cost her uncle a throne, and her sister Margaret a chance at happiness with the man she loved. The crown demanded sacrifice, and Elizabeth had spent her entire life making those sacrifices without complaint, without rebellion, without ever questioning whether the price was too high. But Diana was fundamentally different. She fought back against the system. She spoke to journalists, breaking the sacred code of silence. She visited AIDS patients when the palace wanted distance. She hugged children in minefields, rewriting what royalty could mean in the modern world. The public adored her for the very qualities that terrified the palace establishment: her vulnerability, her raw emotion, her stubborn refusal to pretend everything was perfect when it clearly wasn't. Behind closed doors, away from cameras and courtiers, Elizabeth watched this unfolding disaster with growing concern and confusion. Multiple sources close to the royal household recall specific moments when the Queen almost reached out to Diana with genuine warmth, almost offered the guidance and support Diana desperately needed, almost acknowledged the impossible situation her daughter-in-law faced, trapped in a loveless marriage with the future king. But each time, at the critical moment, duty intervened. Protocol silenced compassion. The institution's survival instinct overrode human connection. What happened next would fracture the monarchy from within and expose the fault lines that had always existed beneath its polished surface. The marriage deteriorated publicly and spectacularly throughout the late 1980s and early. Charles and Diana became warring factions, each strategically leaking damaging stories to competing journalists. each trying to control the narrative, each desperate to be understood as the victim rather than the villain. The palace machinery ground forward mechanically, trying to manage an unprecedented scandal while maintaining the increasingly impossible illusion of family unity. Elizabeth found herself trapped in the middle, mediating between her son and his wife, satisfying neither, helping neither, failing both. There were private meetings during this period, tense, uncomfortable conversations in cold drawing rooms, where Diana pleaded for support, for understanding, for someone in the family to acknowledge her suffering. And Elizabeth offered only carefully worded neutrality, diplomatic language that said everything and nothing. The Queen could not take sides without undermining the future king. She could not acknowledge Diana's pain without admitting the institution itself was fundamentally flawed. So she said nothing of real substance. She advised patience, discretion, duty, the same mantras that had sustained her through her own difficulties. Diana felt utterly abandoned. She had married into what she naively thought was a family, and discovered it was a corporation, a business, a cold institution that processed emotions like paperwork. Elizabeth, bound by decades of conditioning and training, genuinely could not give Diana what she desperately needed: permission to be human, to hurt openly, to leave without shame. In 1992, after years of behind-the-scenes warfare, the palace officially announced the separation. Elizabeth had failed to hold the marriage together despite her best diplomatic efforts. Privately, those close to the Queen report she felt genuine sadness during this period, not just for the damage to the monarchy's carefully cultivated image, but for Diana personally, for the young woman who had entered the family with such hope and was leaving it broken. Yet even then, constrained by protocol and position, she could not express these feelings openly. The Crown did not permit such vulnerability, not even in private. The following years brought escalating warfare that shocked even seasoned royal watchers. Diana's Panorama interview in 1995 detonated like a bomb in the heart of the establishment. 23 million people watched as she methodically exposed the emptiness of her marriage, the constant presence of Camilla Parker Bowles, her own struggles with bulimia and self-harm that the palace had ignored. She challenged the institution directly, publicly questioning whether Charles was psychologically fit to be king. It was unprecedented, unforgivable, devastating. Elizabeth was reportedly not angry when she watched the interview. She was devastated. The broadcast forced her to confront what she had long avoided, acknowledging the palace system she had devoted her entire life to protecting and preserving had completely failed Diana. The institution Elizabeth believed in had crushed a vulnerable young woman who had only wanted to be loved, to matter, to make a difference. But no one knew the real consequence of that moment, or what it revealed about the Queen's own internal struggle. After the interview's explosive impact, Elizabeth made an unprecedented personal decision. She wrote formal letters to both Charles and Diana, strongly advising them to divorce quickly and quietly. It was the only time in her reign she had directly intervened in such an intimate family matter. Some royal commentators interpreted it as cold political calculation, removing a dangerous threat to the monarchy's survival. Others saw it very differently, a woman finally, belatedly acknowledging that the institution's inhuman demands were actively destroying lives, and that perhaps some prices were too high even for a crown. Diana received the Queen's letter with deeply mixed emotions. It was too late for reconciliation. The damage was irreversible, the wounds too deep. Yet there was something in the Queen's carefully chosen words, a hint of genuine regret buried beneath the formal diplomatic language, a suggestion that Elizabeth understood more than she could ever say aloud. They saw each other occasionally after the divorce was finalized. Brief, awkward encounters at family events centered on William and Harry. Stilted conversations constrained by formality and the constant presence of staff members. Elizabeth never apologized for the years of silence. She never explained her choices. The crown simply did not permit such naked vulnerability, such admission of failure or doubt. Then came the early morning hours of August 31st, 1997, when everything changed forever. The phone call reached Elizabeth at Balmoral Castle while she slept. Diana had been in a catastrophic car accident in a Paris tunnel. The injuries were severe. Then, minutes later, the final confirmation. She was gone. The Queen's first instinct, according to multiple sources present that morning, was to protect William and Harry. She immediately went to their rooms, ensuring they were still peacefully asleep, buying them a few more precious hours of childhood innocence before their lives shattered completely. But in the terrible days that followed, something fundamental cracked inside Elizabeth's carefully constructed emotional armor. The public outpouring of grief was unprecedented in British history. Millions lined the streets in spontaneous mourning. Mountains of flowers piled outside Kensington Palace. The nation demanded the Queen return to London immediately, show visible emotion, publicly acknowledge the catastrophic loss. Elizabeth initially resisted these demands firmly. She believed her proper place was at Balmoral, with her traumatized grandsons, shielding them from the media chaos and hysteria engulfing London. She followed established protocol precisely. Diana was no longer Her Royal Highness after the divorce, so full royal mourning procedures did not technically apply. The Queen genuinely believed she was doing the right thing, the proper thing, the dutiful thing. The grieving public saw it completely differently. They saw coldness, calculated indifference, institutional cruelty. The monarchy's approval ratings plummeted to historic lows. For the first time in her long reign, Elizabeth faced genuine, widespread anger from her subjects. The institution she had sacrificed everything to protect was crumbling because she had followed its rules too faithfully. Those close to the Queen during that week describe a woman in profound turmoil. Privately, she questioned everything she had believed about duty, about protocol, about the institution she served. Had she been too rigid with Diana? Too blindly loyal to outdated protocols? Could she have saved Diana's life by breaking the rules she had spent decades upholding? The agonizing questions tormented her, but she shared them with absolutely no one, even in crisis. The Crown demanded silence. On September 5th, 1997, the day before Diana's funeral, Elizabeth finally returned to London under immense pressure. She toured the overwhelming flower tributes outside Buckingham Palace, speaking quietly with grieving citizens. That evening, she gave a televised address, the first time she had ever spoken to the nation about a deeply personal family matter. Her words were carefully chosen, meticulously balanced between institutional duty and human emotion. She called Diana an exceptional and gifted human being. She acknowledged the nation's grief, but she did not apologize. She could not. The institution did not permit such admission of failure. Yet those who knew Elizabeth intimately saw something beneath the composed exterior that shocked them. Regret. Genuine, profound, devastating regret. Not for the divorce itself or the family conflicts, but for something deeper. The conversations never held, the support never offered, the humanity never shown when it mattered most. And what happened next would quietly change the monarchy forever. In the years following Diana's death, Elizabeth slowly, almost imperceptibly, transformed her approach. She became more personally accessible, more willing to adapt rigid royal protocols to modern realities. She eventually allowed Charles to marry Camilla, something that would have been absolutely unthinkable before now. She supported William and Harry's desire for more authentic, less constrained lives, finally understanding what institutional rigidity had cost their mother. but she never spoke publicly about her private regrets regarding Diana. That was not the royal way. Elizabeth processed her complex emotions privately, silently, carrying the heavy weight of what might have been said, what should have been done differently, what simple words of support might have changed. Those closest to the Queen report that in her final years, she occasionally mentioned Diana, always with a particular, unmistakable tone in her voice. Wistful, sad, haunted, there were crucial conversations she wished she had courageously initiated, words of genuine empathy she wished she had spoken aloud, permission to be imperfectly human she wished she had granted without conditions. But by then, it was far too late. Diana was gone, and Elizabeth was left with the unbearable knowledge that sometimes institutional duty demands too high a price, that loyalty to an ancient institution can cost you the chance to save someone who desperately needed saving, that silence can be as destructive as cruelty. The Queen had made her choice decades earlier: crown over emotion, protocol over compassion, institution over individual. She had believed it was the only way to preserve the monarchy through a changing world, and perhaps in purely institutional terms, she was right. The monarchy survived Diana's death. The crown endured. But in surviving, what was irretrievably lost? What human connections were sacrificed on the altar of duty? Elizabeth never answered those questions publicly. She carried them silently, privately, until her own death in September 20. Two extraordinary women, both trapped by the same crown, both unable to break free from the roles history and circumstance had assigned them. One died young, desperate for authentic human connection. The other lived long, forever wondering if a few honest words, spoken at the right moment, might have changed everything. The palace walls still stand strong. The ancient protocols remain largely unchanged. But somewhere in those historic halls, there lingers the ghost of a conversation that never happened between a queen who could not allow herself to bend and a princess who could not force herself to break. Some regrets are too heavy for even a crown to balance.